Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Marketing Leaders Circle. Today, we're talking trade shows. It's an important which is close to our heart in the media and entertainment industry. Trade shows like NAB, IBC, Media Production Technology Show, and CES were firmly part of our calendar. It's where we got together for a catch-up and a beer, and ultimately to do deals. Those were the good old days, and Corona had different ideas for us. As a consequence, it's put huge pressure on all marketers who had to work at lightning speed last year to pivot their activities and rethink their strategy. With the recent announcement of further postponements, such as Infocom being postponed to October, MPTS being postponed to next year, and only today, IBC announcing the potential postponement to December 2021, it's created much more confusion. So, what tactics are marketers using at the moment to meet their KPIs, and what are the shows doing to support our industry? Well, very conveniently, we have three amazingly well-fitting perspectives on the panel today. We have a seller, a buyer, and a trade show organizer. So, I'd like to welcome Margaret Davies, CMO of Redby, Andy Beale, Chief Engineer at BT Sport, and Dorian Sullivan, VP of Audience Development at NAB, for today's roundtable discussion. Hello and welcome, Margaret. First, I'd love to have a chat with you. Then I'll move on to Dorian and then Andy, and then we'll go to a panel discussion, followed by questions from you at home. So if you've got any questions, please put them into the chat and we will aim to answer, or the panelists will aim to answer your questions. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Jessica.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Looking forward to this. It's a topic that has been very engaging and brought us a lot of sleepless nights over the last year.
I can imagine lots of knots in the stomach and anxious moments.
Correct.
So when the pandemic kind of hit its peak with national lockdown and no movement whatsoever, how did Redby pivot internally initially? What was the kind of immediate reaction?
So the immediate reaction, and we can date this to exactly 12 months ago, was that we were in the middle of launching refreshed branding, a refreshed brand visual identity and refreshed brand messaging. And NAB 2020, we had planned as the first physical manifestation of that refreshed visual brand identity. So the immediate reaction, and we withdrew from NAB just prior to the show actually cancelling itself, was now is not the right time during a global pandemic to launch our refreshed branding and our refreshed visual identity. And it meant we very quickly had to rethink all of this work that we had been doing for 12 to 18 months previously on reworking on our brand DNA. How do we bring this to market? It also meant from our perspective that, we had been working very hard on transforming our entire function to being a campaign-led one, whether it was brand awareness campaigns or sales campaigns. And the tactics that we had designed for 2020, they needed to become digital first and digital only. So in some ways, it didn't mean for us a pivot. What it meant was you removed your trade show tactics from your campaign plans, and you needed to really relook at what we had on our transformation path ourselves, and to accelerate that. So the initial reaction was, we went ahead and we did NAB Express, but really we took Q2 to very much understand, okay, what are the elements we are now going to use to accelerate our own digital marketing transformation, bring our refreshed branding and visual identity to life, and look at how we meet both those demand gen and brand awareness goals that we had for ourselves for 2020 anyway.
So did that mean that your KPIs needed to change, or did your KPIs remain the same? It was just the tactics that you had to get to those KPIs that changed?
So what it meant was when when we moved to digital only, it actually brought into focus that we needed to have far more KPIs. So we really needed to focus on not just leads, marketing ready leads, and pushing those through into sales. We needed to focus on digital audience reach. We needed to focus on digital audience reach specific to each of the customer segments that we go after and each of the territories that we go after. So it didn't change the KPIs. If anything, it expanded the numbers that we have, because whereas previously we would have looked at raw figures in terms of booth leads generated, that you would go to a trade show and you had these two peaks in the year. Now in the digital world, we were looking at far more KPIs that we were putting on ourselves to grow the audience, improve engagement, improve conversions through all of our digital channels. And we started putting much more pressure on ourselves because we had so much more data at our fingertips, that whereas previously we had a lead gen curve, as I said, had these two spikes, really what we needed to ensure is that in the aggregate, we met that volume, but actually it was coming through in a very different way. So it felt very different to our sales teams in terms of what we were pushing through, and they didn't feel like it was enough. But of course, then as the industry started to recover in Q3, Q4, we had a lot more virtual events. That's when it then started to pick up and feel a little bit more like the run rate that we would have had in 2019.
I imagine that what you would qualify as a booth lead is very different to what you qualify as a digital lead. How did you kind of, come to define what each of those really mean?
So great question, because it's not that a booth lead is different to a digital lead. It's that with the introduction for us of marketing automation, and last year in the midst of everything we were doing, we implemented Pardot. So suddenly what we had was the ability to score leads in a far more systematic way than what we would have ever done previously. So the differentiation that I draw is less between the fact that a lead would have come from a booth as opposed to something that was converted from our website. It's more to do with the fact that when you would go to a trade show and somebody takes the booth scan, all of those leads would have been given to the sales team. Yes, you weed out vendors and press and analysts and students and former employees that are coming to say hi, or existing customers and people that you already know. But the difference is that I would use the term cold versus warm. So, you would have passed booth leads where you were reliant on the quality of the person scanning the booth and inputting data into an app to be able to pass that to sales. In the digital world, very little gets passed to sales unless it's a very specific sales inquiry, that's coming through from the call to action on the website. Because what we're doing is you're effectively triaging them and qualifying them and judging their engagement for a lot longer before you pass it to sales. So now you're measuring engagement, you're measuring every single interaction that they have with Red Bee, you're scoring that. So when we now pass that lead to sales, what they've got is the entire history of what that engagement has been in Pardot and in Salesforce.
So it actually sounds like not having any trade shows was quite liberating.
It was liberating for many reasons. One, which is, as I said, the marketing function within Red Bee, with the Red Bee brand having been reintroduced by Ericsson in the end of 2017, it was already on a transformation path. We already had plans of how to be digital first and to introduce the marketing technology and the tooling. But we're a small team. So no trade shows was absolutely liberating, because number one, it created space for my team and time for us to be able to focus on redoing our lead management processes, implementing Pardot. It enabled us to focus on launching our new website, improving our paid social, our paid search, focusing on our SEO. Not having to consume months and months, and from my perspective, 2 and 3 people that get involved in being full-time dedicated to create the show, it created time and space for us to be able to do the things that we would have already wanted to do, but we got them done much faster. As a result, it means, we have moved into a much more campaign-driven way. We've become much more savvy about how we're performing. We're still learning and we're still bedding in everything that we've got. But in terms of what it has enabled us as a marketing function to do, yes, it has been quite liberating not to have any trade shows this year.
And two more quick questions just before I move on to Dorian. Firstly, did you manage to get more lead gen through not having a physical trade show, going to physical trade shows this year? So did you maintain or actually increase your lead gen? And second question, did you spend all of your marketing budget that you would have spent on trade shows, or did you save, or have you saved that for future years when trade shows do come back into play?
Okay, so I'll answer your second question first, which is, yes, we spent our trade show budget, we redirected it towards our digital channels. Did we generate the same leads? So in the aggregate, yes, but what has been much better in the digital world is that we focused on creating much more specific sales campaigns this year, more than what we had originally intended. So what that has meant is, in terms of getting leads from new customers in new segments where we are trying to grow our business, that has been more successful. I still think we have an awful lot of work to do in terms of engaging with our existing customers, because how we've done our account-based marketing this year has been very heavily reliant on actually the existing relationships that have been in place. So in the aggregate, we have maintained our lead generation, and in fact, we have increased it. But what has been very different in the digital domain is actually what we have increased is the leads generated from new customers and new customer segments, as opposed to in the trade show world, what we were really generating much more heavily is engaging with existing customers and new people within existing customer organizations. So it's a slightly different profile of what we have generated this year. I think you're on mute, Jessica.
I'm very sorry. We're going to bring you back for the panel discussion. And audience, if you've got any questions for Margaret in the meantime, start typing. In the meantime, let's welcome Dorian, all the way from Arizona.
Actually, I'm from Alexandria, Virginia.
Oh, there we go, Virginia. In the US.
It's actually snowing here. It'd probably be nicer in Arizona, but yes, thank you so much for having me on.
No, thank you, thank you. I mean, all of this is very timely for you guys. I guess you've got NAB Amplify, which is about to launch, but you've been through, as an event organizer myself, you've been through, I understand, the roller coaster that you've been through during this pandemic, and particularly at the beginning when it was one of the first, NAB was one of the first shows that had to cancel, and very quickly you brought together NAB Express within, I think you mentioned previously, 45 days, which is amazing. So tell us, a lot of people were involved with that, but what was your biggest learning from NAB Express?
Well, you're right. So we were one of the first shows that called, that we were postponing or rescheduling, and we did that because we were thinking of the community's health and safety first, and so that was just the right thing to do. Now, that being said, we were also very close to our own show dates in April. And we realized that the community uses NAB Show as a platform to unveil their products, their newest innovations, right? And they've been working on this for the whole year. And there was a real loss when there wasn't that global stage to help all of these companies celebrate everything that they've been working on. So we decided to put up NAB Show Express, and yes, 45 days to do it. And the way that we did it was really leaning on our partners. We were very fortunate because media and entertainment and technology has some really great companies, and it was our own community that responded first. and said, let us help you with this, let us help you with closed captioning, with the broadcast, with streaming needs. And so we leaned, into that and our partners. And then we also really had to understand what we could do fairly well, given the amount of time that we had. And I think that what we learned is that it's really great to put something up, but you really need to understand the experience and test it. And that led us into a lot of research. And by doing the research, we are listening to the customer, trying to understand how their marketing and lead generation efforts are changing, evolving, how their budget is changing and evolving. So that was a really great lesson learned. The other thing that we learned that with digital, it takes away some of the barriers that shows typically have, such as for international, the visas or travel, or even just, costs for exhibitors and such. The digital area can be a little bit more affordable. So we are looking at all the things that we're putting up. And on Tuesday of next week, one of those is launching a new digital platform for media and entertainment called NAB Amplify.
Yeah, tell us about that. I mean, what is it about NAB Amplify that would be unique? What's the differentiator, and how will it help our industry?
Yeah, so NAB Amplify includes the entire content ecosystem. So it's not just a platform that's just television and just radio and just streaming and just live production. It is inclusive of everything from creation to distribution to consumption, and that's a very unique offering. It also is inclusive of many features. So there's a directory for companies. There's connectivity between peers. There are digital events and facilitated networking opportunities. I know that there are other platforms out there that might offer one of these things. This is holistic of the entire community. Oh, and also fresh content for all the communities. So it's really different in that way. There's nothing else like that. And the other thing too is that the content is actually curated from many sources. It's not just our writers, putting it out there, but you're getting a lot of fresh and diverse perspectives that feed into the conversations and the viewpoints that are being presented.
Can we drill down a little bit into the networking piece? Because that seems to be, nobody's found that holy grail yet, and it seems to be really the tough part to crack over virtual. How does the networking part work with NAB Amplify?
Yeah, it is. It's a tough one. We are still testing, experiences and ways to facilitate it. One of the things that we have is just making connections like you would, LinkedIn on the platform. You can build your profile, you can make connections, you can start conversations, you can comment, on different articles and such. But we also are hosting events such as coffee shops, where there is a challenge either by the industry or by a company, and other professionals can join this small group to work through the problems and potentially present solutions. Or we have encore sessions, which would be maybe like a live event or a panel discussion one week, and then the next week, smaller groups coming back to have part two of that conversation for them to express or ask, follow-on questions. And so it's really, it's centered around the community, but the community also contributes and shapes it and gives input on what they would like for it to be. So even the crowdsourced solutions, that we were just talking about with some of those coffee shops. So those are some of the things that we're testing. We, of course, invite everybody to come into NAB Amplify and let us know what you think. We'll hopefully improve upon the experiences.
And of course, the networking and the connections piece then needs to transfer into qualified leads, which is what everyone is talking about. It's leads. It's the hot word at the moment. How does that work in a practical sense with NAB Amplify? How do we convert those connections into leads?
Yeah. So we are also looking at our digital or online offerings for our corporate partners that are on Amplify or that are members of NAB Amplify. And we've been kind of redesigning that experience, always with lead generation at the very top of the priority. We are having something in March called Demo Days, and it'll be around sports and news production. And we will have corporate partners that are doing demos for, potential NAB Amplify users. But with that, we are putting a layer of surveying and polling so that the corporate partner is also getting information about their products, about questions that the community might have. And so we're going to do that before to help shape the demo itself and curate the conversation to what the buyers are most interested in. But then we will be doing that during, so that there's some insights that we can then, share with the partner. And then we're going to be doing that post. So that's like another research overlay. And then also, we will be going out specifically to profiles that the corporations are supplying us with that make it qualified leads that will be coming to those demos. So those are some of the things that we are working on, and even just customizing experiences. We realize that all budgets have been rebalanced now, right? And that we need to be thinking about what are the creative solutions that we can put together for them using our database, our reach, and our platform to get them those qualified leads. And so that's really where we're at right now and trying to reimagine some of those.
Brilliant, thank you. And one last question before we move to Andy and then the panel discussion. Do you think NAB realistically will happen? It's in October.
Yes. This is a gap year for every trade show, and everybody's moved into fourth quarter. So there's a lot of density there, and I think that everybody exhibitors and attendees needs to look at where they're going to be getting their best ROI and what makes best sense for them. I believe that having our show in October, especially if IBC is moving, will make us one of the first shows, and also as we're planning hybrid, one of the first hybrid shows to come up in the calendar year. But yes, we will be having a show this year.
Excellent. Thank you, Dorian. Okay, I'd like to welcome Andy Beale to the stage. Hello, Andy.
Hi, Jessica. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you? I like your fancy setup.
Thank you. I'm very good, thank you. Very good.
So, Andy, I guess you're a perfect example of a qualified lead, an end user who is the perfect qualified lead. I mean, it's great to have you on the panel because, and as an end user, I'd be keen to understand for you, how has the pandemic affected the way you buy technology, how you scope out new technologies, how you find new innovations without trade shows? Yeah,
it's a fascinating question, isn't it? And hi everyone at home watching. Hope you're all keeping well and safe in these times, and good to see you with us. It's a great question. Do you know what, if I wind it back before I answer it directly, Jessica, I think it's funny. I was reflecting a couple of years ago, maybe 2019, after being at NAB and IBC, and it struck me then, in fact, that perhaps trade shows as we know and love them big exhibition spaces, huge exhibitions, and these amazing constructions that we put into the huge halls. As the industry is migrating to SaaS technology, to cloud compute, to software-driven architectures, it struck me that the old-fashioned exhibition model was in danger of looking seriously dated anyway. And a lot of companies spending a huge amount of money to pay for real estate to demonstrate something which actually you can just as adequately, if not better, demonstrate on a collaborative session like we're doing here, or a Teams meeting. Or it really resonated that I thought maybe the time was right to reimagine what a trade show should be and how it really fulfills what we need as buyers, and how vendors can adequately sell to us. How can they use that experience to adequately sell and explain what they've got. And often I find myself feeling unfulfilled. You can't really get on a booth on an uncomfortable designer high bar stool chair for the 12th time in a day, perched trying to have a meeting. It's really hard to be engaged and have that session. At the same time, no question, there is something untangible about the benefit of being at a trade show, which is really valuable. And I think they have really missed it. Things like, as well as the obvious stuff, there's the product launches. So you get these cycles of development, which means that it drives the vendor community forward in this cyclic manner to develop new products in time with key cycles. And I think there's a danger we'll miss those cycles. There's obviously the conference program, which conference programs happen online really, really well. And there are great tools just like this to do brilliant conferences. But actually, the real value for me in a conference is not necessarily just the presentation. The presentation is always useful and interesting. But it's, that if you go to look at a specific presentation, you've gone there for a reason. You're interested in the subject matter, and probably you will meet people in the auditorium who are there like-minded, also interested in the same subject matter. So often some of the most valuable conversations I have are with people who have gone to see the same presentation or white paper or whatever it might be as me, because they've got an interest, common interest, and I can pick their brains and share intelligence and insight with them, or with the speakers or panelists on the show. So that's one thing I've really missed. And there's obviously the really intangible and difficult to put a figure on how it's valuable networking element we talked about. It's really, really hard to replicate networking in a digital domain. As brilliant as Teams and Zoom and all these other platforms are, really getting that contact eye to eye. And also you just get ad hoc information. You pick things up, you get tidbits, you get insight, you spot trends. You say you bump into someone you haven't seen for a year, you at the bar walking past them on the after the show, and then they point out they've seen something, so you go the next day and you find out. And it just generates a whole load of extra leads and insight you just can't get from being here. And I've seen some brilliant attempts at it, and I don't mean it disparagingly. People have had a really great go at trying to recreate and innovate, and my hat's off to them. A great example, Simply tried really hard with their conference to recreate the social experience with online meeting forums, but it just isn't the same. If you go to a drinks reception in real life, you obviously find someone you want to talk to, you meet them, you have a quick chat, and you turn to your left and someone else there, and you have a chat with them, and you have to turn to someone else, and you have these little naturally organic conversations. And in the course of an hour at a drinks reception, you've met 25 people and learned lots of information and shared lots of information. When you go on a Zoom, you're all there together, so no one wants to talk because you can't talk and you can't have that intimate chat. So it's really hard to recreate that very unique experience that you get in networking, which is it's wide and collaborative with everyone's there, but also it's very, very personal at the same time. And that's the thing that's very difficult to have. In terms of actually buying, it's been really hard. I mean, if I'm honest, I suspect that most people in my position have been the same as me this past year and have been incredibly busy just pivoting their own businesses. And that's probably been a challenge for vendors to reach us. My LinkedIn inbox, I'm not going to lie, it's full of people who have tried to reach out. And truthfully, I haven't had time to connect because I've just been so busy delivering the transition I need to deliver to my business. So I guess it's been really, really hard for them. What I would say is there's been a couple of good initiatives. I really enjoyed something the DPP put together last year. They put together a series of elevator pitches categorized together in verticals, and you could opt in or opt out. And in the course of an hour, they gave 10 carefully chosen vendors the opportunity to present for 3 minutes and no more. And at the end of it, you could decide if you liked it. You could agree to share your details with them. That was really powerful because in 3 minutes, I knew whether I was interested or not interested, and I could then opt to share all my details and give them access to my inbox or just move on. And there was no pressure or wasted time being polite and courteous as I tried to move away from that opportunity. So I thought that was a really, really interesting tool, and I thought it was really powerful. And I'd love to see more of that. And I certainly think there's a place for, the traditional trade show vendors to follow similar models. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I'm keen to know what you think. What are you hearing amongst your peer group in terms of what the end users are wanting? Is there anything missing that we can create together as an industry, come together as trade show organisers, as regulatory bodies, as vendors, etc.?
There's a couple of other, so first of all, there's a couple of other benefits, I think. One of the things, if you take NAB as an example for us as a UK customer, we were never going to take more than 4 or 5 people to NAB. Getting business travel signed off in the modern world with CFO pressure these days is impossible. Everyone knows that the difficulty is getting business cases signed off to travel. So we would take a small group of people to NAB, and we'd have to try and represent all the facets of our business, looking at things like from vision, sound, IP, graphics, VR, AR, everything. We're trying to represent and get feedback and information on all those brands, as well as conduct our own business, have have C-suite meetings, have all that kind of good stuff, and trying to fit all that in is really difficult. One of the benefits of having a digital approach and having an online approach is that, of course, we can now open it up, and anyone in our business can meet with and interact with their counterpoint in the right vendors. They can explore the market. They can go and find out for themselves what's interesting and come back and tell us what we should have been looking at in the first place. So I do think there's a really interesting opportunity around now getting the more accurately, the sales messages with the right people, which ultimately should be able to convert into some better business interest. There's also the question of sustainability. Traveling. I mean, as much as we like going to Vegas, traveling with the lobburst to Vegas and air travel and the current sustainability agenda is really hard again to justify. Do we really need to go and do that meeting every year, have 4 days in Vegas when we can do a lot of it digitally? I suspect not. Is it more appropriate now for that to be a biannual visit rather than annual? Do we actually perhaps focus their efforts and be more specific about what we use NAB for, and potentially use the European or domestic trade shows in a different way? There's lots of interesting conundrums, I think, to consider.
I mean, I'd like to bring Margaret and Dorian back to the screen, actually, and I just want to touch upon what you mentioned, Andy, in terms of it's definitely being virtual is definitely more inclusive. Different teams can access content, make connections, but on the flip side, how good are the leads? How do you dilute your audience because everyone can join a virtual event? I mean, we saw that kind of with a physical event in the good old days of BVE, where they decided to make it free, and students started to attend. So how do you kind of make it inclusive, accessible, but also then make sure that the quality of leads is extremely high? And maybe Dorian, I'm going to come to you first on that one.
Yeah, no, we've been working on that, and it really gets down into the data, and more than just I think there might be an echo, more than just a company name and a title, but also about their behavior. So even now that we're putting up NAB Amplify, we can see the things that they're interested in. We, what they're engaging in, and that's adding more qualification. At a trade show, you potentially meet a lot of new, but then you might follow up after the show to really develop them. And the Amplify can help with providing an additional touch point as well. But we are getting into the data and building profiles. I know that I've talked to Margaret about, how do we find lookalikes? How can we build personas potentially for some of your best customers, some of the customers that are really great influencers that might bring you additional business and everything. And those are the types of ideas that we're working in the data on.
And Margaret, does that sound like an attractive proposition to you as an exhibitor?
It does, but I think, in listening to Andy, and there were so many things in what he said that what we've learned through 2020 is previously trade shows were fulfilling a whole range of needs. They were driving for us brand awareness. You were helping to connect with existing customers. You were, Red Bee is both a seller and a buyer. So we were connecting, just like Andy, with the industry as well. And we were trying to generate prospects. What we have found over the last year through both experimentation with trade show organisers that have gone online, through the virtual events we've done ourselves and through our own sales campaigns, is a trade show for us is not going to be the one thing, the one tactic that fulfills all of those things. So, you know, when Andy is saying that, you know, what you're missing is that connection, you're missing those serendipitous social opportunities to engage with your peers that spark ideas, then I think we need different formats for that, because we haven't been able to replicate that digitally. You know, I think an awful lot of what we saw last year was actually people in some ways trying to mimic the physical world in the online world. And nobody cracked networking. You know, I had very mixed experiences around doing online booths. If I could use, you know, I had the experience where, it's a bad analogy, but it was the equivalent of setting up a digital online booth, and you could hear the, you know, you could whistle down the wind, and there was nobody coming. You know, there was nobody coming to it. But we've had huge success with very focused sales campaigns, and we've done really well where you've created environments where it's closed round tables with a very specific audience, where it's Chatham House rules, and then they get to have that open conversation. So the thing that's different, I think, for us as marketers going forward is, previously, you know, these two big anchor shows or whatever trade shows you would go to in the year, marketers view them as trying to fulfill a range of activities. I think my view now is we have to be much more specific around what we're expecting to achieve, and trade shows will play a part, but whether, quite frankly, whether it is lead generation or whether it's more to tap into that social networking, that aspect that that Andy had picked up on, I think that's very much what we're trying to weigh up right now.
So just touching on what Andy mentioned about, you know, those moments where you bump into someone in a corridor, or you've gone to the same content session. Do you have a budget for serendipity? You know, is there a budget for that discovery and serendipity? Because it seems like you've cracked the kind of data part in a digital transformation strategy.
So that's a really hard one, Jessica, because all of the vendor community have been impacted by the downturn in ad revenues on commercial broadcasters. When customers spend less, that trickles down through all of the vendor community. And while there are parts of our business, just like Andy's, where budgets will improve because it's part of accelerating your digital transformation, when you're in marketing, CFOs, unfortunately, will still be viewing it either directly as a discretionary spend by the business, or something that you really do need to have a rock solid ROI. I can't measure the ROI on serendipity networking. That is the real challenge. So we have got to find ways to. We haven't cracked it. We've got to find ways of doing it. But when the pressure is on our sales teams, actually, it will become skewed towards those lead generation activities, and I would say those brand awareness activities. What we are spending money on this year, though, is those round table events, creating those opportunities for people like Andy, people in the customers that we engage with, to try and have those intimate conversations that are higher quality, and that you're not having to do it while balancing your food and your drink in your hand at the same time.
And Andy, you mentioned, you know, about how even before the pandemic that, you know, trade shows should be reinventing themselves almost, because we're moving towards more of a SaaS model, and, you know, there's less kit to showcase, etc., and people want to network. So firstly, I want to ask you, you know, what if you visualize in 5 years' time, what would that perfect trade show look like to you? What would you expect? And then Dorian, I want to come to you and ask you, from a trade show organizer perspective, how are you future-proofing your business? How are you future-proofing NAB to ensure that you are going to be meeting the expectations of the community in the future?
So that's a big question. I think if I knew the answer, I'd have left my current job and set up a business and done it by now, because it's a huge opportunity. I just saw it as a problem and a need, and truthfully, I don't fully know the answer. It needs working through, and I think, as Margaret articulated really well, you know, we've tried to transform some things this year, and some things have worked really well, and some things definitely haven't. So it needs a bit of exploration. I I just don't know right now. There must be a better way. I just don't know what it is, and it needs to be found.
Dorian, I mean, I'll come to you then. So, you know, the pandemic, you know, is obviously being catastrophic, but also an opportunity perhaps for you to think about, okay, potentially, you know, how can we reinvent ourselves in the future, and what are the kind of things that you're thinking about that when physical shows return, what the kind of features or types of engagement that you're thinking about?
Yeah, we have to think about these things. We don't have, you know, all the answers. We can't predict everything. But actually in 2018 was when, or I'm sorry, it was 2019, excuse me. In 2019, we actually took the idea of NAB Amplify and the digital platform to the board to get funding because we saw the vision of needing the online and the digital to serve the community, and putting something out there that would not just serve for 6 days a year, but year wide, right? And so it just so happened that the pandemic kind of put everything on fast forward for us. And we were standing things up faster than we were expecting to do. So we knew that this component was an area that we needed to grow. We'll always have physical shows. I think that we've all heard here that the face-to-face connectivity and the spontaneous conversations and even the mindset that people have when they go into a show where they want to make connections and they're open to it is not something that can be replaced right now in this digital environment. So we're definitely looking at how we do hybrid so that we can have digital to digital interactions. We're looking at our face-to-face interactions, and then we're looking at our in-person live to digital, right? And how both audiences are somehow aware of each other and still able to collaborate and network and connect around the things that are happening in the physical, and then also having something in the digital. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, but physical will always be an element of what we're doing. We are just adding on additional digital and moments in time in, you know, NAB Amplify for events.
There's another. Go on, Margaret.
Sorry, I was going to jump in there if you don't mind, because I think, and it's to pick up on something, Andy, you had said, is one of the really big things, though, with regard to trade shows in the future is the sustainability issue. And, you know, what this year has taught us is, you know, we would have sent product teams, engineering teams, sales and marketing teams to these trade shows, and business travel obviously hasn't happened this year. And I think that there is a real reticence, both on personal levels and on corporate levels, to return to those levels of travel, to return to that type of carbon footprint. So when we think about how we are reshaping trade shows in the future, it does come down to a number of elements. It comes down to that corporate view on sustainability, but it comes down to addressing that from a corporate perspective, but then blending that with what Andy has said in terms of how you could be creating those meaningful moments to network. And you see, then this becomes, again, back to the real world of where your budgetary pressures really kick in, because you're trying to create those connections with customers and prospects, create those opportunities, those high value, high quality conversations. You've got to do it within budget. Those things are very difficult to measure from an ROI perspective. And at the back of your head all of the time is, do we really need to do it? Because we've proven in the past how certain elements can be done online. And now we have, you know, we all have a much more higher awareness of our carbon footprint and our commitments just to sustainability. So I still think we're very much, you know, I applaud Dorian for what they're trying to do in terms of addressing the hybrid, but I think there is a very much a changed conversation in relation to sustainability, and I think that is going to impact the nature of events going forward, probably even more so than marketing budgets and marketing goals.
And Margaret, it's not just the travel to get there, the long distance airplane. I hate to say it, Dorian, but if any of us have ever been at trade shows on 1 hour after they close, there's a lot of rubbish going into big skips. The waste profile of a trade show is really quite phenomenal, and so I think there is a challenge for trade shows to reform and understand how they can be more sustainable. 100%. There was one other point I thought of though, which I was just going to come to, that Dorian, you made me think of. There's one other really valuable asset about the physical trade show, particularly with IBC being across a weekend and NAB being outside of our working hours, which is that for the period of time that we're at the show, it's one of the few times of the year I genuinely don't get disturbed, really, unless there's a critical problem gone horribly wrong, at home. But with base, it's the one time I give my 100% focus to the agenda and the calendar and the things that are happening in the trade show. And as much as I can pretend I'm fully invested in a conference online, watching something at home or a panel chat or whatever it might be, the truth of the matter is emails are always coming in, phone's still ringing. People don't respect those borders and think of me as being out of the office in the same way. So it's very hard to have full attention, full concentration, full engagement over a period of 2 or 3 or 4 days. And the one nice thing about being away is that you do get that complete set block of time, which again is going against something else.
Pretty immersive.
It is an interesting observation. Yeah.
Just talking about kind of sustainability and budgets and travel restrictions, etc. Is there then an argument that actually shows will go back to being more regional, less global, more regional focused, in-person regional events, and perhaps virtually that's where you meet kind of global connections? Do you foresee that trend, Dorian? Is that something that you've talked about at NAB?
We have, we've tested some regional events and gotten some good response, and then we continue to think about regional events again for the fact that it's less costly, of course, for some of our exhibitors and also buyers to get together. You can also localize, the conversation and the theme and the umbrella of that area. So yeah, it's definitely something that we've done some tests prior to the pandemic, and then have done some thinking on most recently.
Brilliant. And we've got a question from the audience for Margaret that I'd like to pull up if possible. Okay, so it's a question from Rebecca. If REDB spent 2020 live events budget on digital initiatives, what does that mean for future trade show budgets? Do you foresee that it might be reduced in order to maintain digital activities in the future?
So great question. Hi, Rebecca. So we diverted all of our 2020 trade show budget into our digital marketing activities. In 2021, we are exclusively digital. So we are not planning to attend either IBC or NAB. Only the digital formats is what we would commit to. How our 2022 budgets is carved up, I think will really depend on what we learn in 2021 in relation to the success of those digital hybrid events. The one thing I've stopped doing is forecasting into the future. I think I work on a quarter by quarter basis now. Because, and Dorian, I think, said it earlier on, I think this is a real year of transition. And the one thing that you do need with your marketing budgets is you need to have the ability to be able to predict the success and to try and predict what that ROI is. And we don't have enough understanding yet of how those hybrid events are going to perform. What is working for us, what is most successful from a digital perspective. So I don't want to, I suppose I can't answer the question directly, Rebecca, because I think we still need to get through 2021, see what works, see what doesn't work, and that will inform how we align our campaign plan tactics to do the things like Andy has said, or to reach audiences and to try and drive brand awareness and create those meaningful conversations. And all I know at this stage is that trade shows have to be in the mix. That's all I know. but I can't foresee it being the level of expenditure or the level of commitment that we would have done in previous years, because I think we have to redirect it to tactics that are proving to give us a higher ROI. Hope that answers the question.
Excellent, thank you. We've got about 8 minutes left, and so if the audience have got any other questions, please type them now in the chat. We've got a question for Dorian, if we can pull that up. Dorian, could NAB or IBC reduce the fees given the likely drop in footfall? I think that would have been well received, but possibly not an option. So I guess, you're getting less traffic, less footfall, so therefore should the cost of exhibiting reflect that?
You know what? I am actually not in charge of pricing for the exhibitors. I'm the VP of Audience Development. So I don't have all of the theory or methodology for all of that. But Mike Ward, I saw your name and face, and I will pass on, hopefully get you an answer.
Thank you, thank you. We've got another question for Margaret. How do sales organisations feel about no trade shows or cutting back live presence? And Margaret, I know that you and I have discussed this previously,
Yeah.
and it's a mindset thing as well. Not just, the fact they can't go, but it's like, a change in habit, really.
So I think there's two parts to the question, if I could address it that way. I think, first of all, go back to 2020. I think there was real fear in relation to how are we going to pull through on the lead gen side when you have a sales organization that is used to these two big spikes coming in April and September, and that's what they're working on during Q2, Q3, and then clearly in Q4 and into Q1 the following year. So it's a mindset change in terms of seeing a different throughput coming through. They have been okay. We have a great team at Red Bee, and I think what they have recognized is that their marketing, the sales and marketing team are very aligned in terms of the goals. So where we have not just worked on our marketing activities last year, but we've actually tried to put tools into the hands of sales as well, so that they can increase their activation. So one investment we made last year was we bought LinkedIn Sales Navigator. So it doesn't replace their ability to network, but it just gives them another format so that whatever assets we're using or whatever we're pushing through social, they're able to activate that themselves. When I look at trade shows for 2021, and into 2022, and where I've been clear that from a Red Bee marketing perspective, we're not participating. That does not mean if these trade shows go ahead that Red Bee sales team won't go. So, if NAB is going ahead in October, then the likelihood is that Red Bee is going to be participating in the digital side, and if social distancing and travel allows, then our Red Bee media sales folk based in the US will most likely go. And that will be to meet and to try and meet either existing customers or prospects, but do that through networking. So again, this being a testing year, my message to our sales organization has been, your marketing support is digital only. If social distancing allows and corporate travel allows, and we get the statistics from Dorian and trade show organisers of what they're expecting from a football perspective, then clearly our salespeople will go. That's harder for marketing people to measure in terms of what they then get out of it, but we would expect them to go, because more than anything, and I'm conscious I'm very data driven and sound quite clinical about it, but we're an industry that thrives on meeting people. That is we tell stories in terms of what we do, but we're an industry that we're the most sociable bunch I think you're ever going to meet. So our salespeople want to meet our customers, because you know what, they really like them, and they really want to meet with them, and they want to hang out with them, and they want to find out what's been happening. So of course we will try and support that, but that's a difference between trying to change the format and the flow of your lead gen through your digital versus those sales contacts, having those direct relationships with their customers. And it may be that they're able to do that faster face to face than marketing is able to support them in the physical world.
Okay, I think that's going to be music to Dorian's ears to hear that, you know, we're a social bunch and we like to meet each other. So the future is hopeful. I'd like to ask Dorian a quick question from the audience, but before I do so, if you could each have a think about, and Andy, I'll come to you first after Dorian, what's your biggest kind of learning from the last 12 months during this awful time of lockdown, pandemic, chaos that will really help you shape your decision for the future? And Dorian, we've got a question, and if each of you could think about that, but Dorian, we've got a question from the audience first that we'd like to bring up. How does stacking trade shows into Q4 serve your stakeholders? Will it just cannibalize the event market and reduce viability in the longer term? That's a question from Steve.
Sure. Yeah, and this is happening, you know, with the pandemic and putting the community's safety, you know, at the front of everything that we're doing. This is happening in every industry. You know, it's everybody is moving to Q4, and it is creating a lot of saturation. And we realize, you know, that we will have less international participants from the buyer side and also the exhibitor side. And I mentioned something about this earlier, is that everybody needs to look at what's best for their own ROI. If their shows that might be regional have also moved into Q4, we understand that it's likely that they might choose that one over, you know, ours, you know, here in the States. Budgets are compressed. Travel budgets, marketing budgets, they're all getting compressed. Everything has got a new lens on it. And then the fact that there is more saturation in these last 3 months of the year is making for tough decisions, you know, for everybody. And so we just want everybody to choose what works best for them, what feels safe, and what feels like is going to bring their business, you know, to healthier levels, as we know that the whole industry needs, you know, a little spark and boost, and has been lapsing from connecting and making sales that they might normally do.
Thank you, Dorian. Very nicely put. So Andy, coming to you, your kind of closing comment in terms of what's been your, you know, the biggest learning outcome for you? What's going to really kind of help you shape the future?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts from me. I mean, I picked up on something about the regionalisation. I do think, particularly in the medium term, regionalisation will be really important, because I think that's the only way we're going to be able to reconvene these social experiences we said are missing. I think that's my observation. We have really missed people. We've really missed the interaction, the spark. Yeah, that's probably the single biggest thing that we've missed from not being at the shows. And I also worry about the trust with people. The IBC statement today worries me. Like last year, it's just kicking the can down the road, and I think it's in danger of being very unfair to a huge community of people who need to make difficult decisions. ISE are still trying to pretend they're going to run a show in Spain in June. You know, I just think these are disingenuous decisions, and people need to be more honest. And I think it's obviously difficult in the short term. I have great empathy with trade show organisers who've got to make their own businesses run and stay in the black. And also, there's a huge supply chain. You know, all these events people in catering and AV who I feel terribly sorry for, who are presumably having a terrible time at the minute. But you know, if people are too disingenuous now, I think there was an element of that last year. There's a danger that the trade show will never come back in the form they wanted to. I think it's really important people are honest and bear their customers, i.e. my vendor community's needs, particularly around the SMEs who are going to really short out. However, my to answer your question specifically, Jessica, and I'm sorry for dragging on, is actually this, that what we've really learned in the last 12 months is that particularly in our sector, we're a hugely innovative bunch. You know, as humans, we're incredibly creative. We're great problem solvers. And if you look at the way Margaret's transformed her business and pivoted it, the way we transformed our business with technology, I know that we will solve these problems one way or another. I know that we haven't quite done it. But if you look at the speed at which so many people in our industry have pivoted and changed our business models, our operational models, the way we conduct ourselves, we will find ways, we will find solutions. And I think that's what's really exciting. So that's, I think, what I've learned.
No, that's brilliant. And I'm glad you brought up the point about, you know, just being more transparent with the community and being honest, because I think that's important. So thank you very much, Andy. Margaret, I'm going to come to you next because you're on screen, and then we'll come to Dorian just with some final thoughts.
So my biggest learning in 2020 is probably not a new one. It's one that I already knew, but I think it really came to the fore. And it actually picks up on Andy's last point, which is, for me, the biggest learning last year was that it is all about your team. You have to have the right people in your team, because what was tested last year, certainly within my team, was their grit, their resilience, their creativity, their ability to be agile, their ability to completely pivot away from, you know, having a job title that was probably one thing and needing to do something completely different. And it just really brought home for me that, you know, we're a small team, we're a tight team, but it is all about the team. And that when the chips are down, you need people around you that have got that balance of, I think, that grit and that resilience, but that are able to be creative and solve problems creatively, because that's what we've all had to do last year, whether it was, you know, in Andy's case, making a big shift to remote production, or from a marketing perspective, you know, really pivoting to digital first, or whatever it is from a technology perspective. Yes, we have the tech, but actually it's the people that you need around you. So, you know, for me, that biggest learning is just reinforcing how important it is to get your hiring decisions right, because last year it really proved that, you know, you need the right people around you to be able to come through these things successfully.
Brilliant, thank you. And Dorian, unfortunately, she's got a meeting at the moment, so she's had to go. But Andy and Margaret, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you both. And Dorian, you know, thank you so much for your honesty and all your insight. You know, it's really been valuable, and we've had some great comments on the chat saying that it's been a great panel discussion. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant.
Okay,
No worries.
That's all we've got time for. I'm really sorry we've gone over by 5 minutes, but I think it was completely worth it to get insights from both Andy and Margaret. If you aren't already aware, we've got an event next week, which is coming up on the 25th of February. It's on account-based marketing. So please register on our website, mlcircle.com, and get involved. There's also an event coming up on the 11th of March, which is, again, about trade shows. This time you have to be a member to attend. So register, get yourself a membership for Marketing Leaders Circle, and then you'll have access to the 11th of March event, where it's going to be very interactive and very engaging. So once again, thank you to the panelists. Thank you for you at home. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week on Thursday.